to present. And her talk is on technical, non-technical, both. And she'll get into more of what that talk entails. But I wanted to give a little spiel on Andrea. She helps scientific and technical people strengthen their communication through experiment-driven approach rooted in system thinking, all the good stuff there. And so I'm excited about that. And then a little bit about Women Coders Inclusive Org. So I'll head over to the next slide here. Just wanted to share the code of conduct that we have. I'm not going to read it in full, but it is available on our website at womencoders.tech. But this is a safe space for you all, and again, really excited to welcome Andrea here. To talk about things that really matter, in our space. And let's go. So if you have any issues, just message us, let us know. And our mission at Women Coders Inclusive Org is to empower a diverse community of women to excel in technology careers. And I personally have been really, grateful to know all of you through the last couple of years that I've been involved in this group, and really, really, really appreciate the community here. A brief moment about upcoming events. We have our next lunch chat, which is Tuesday, March 10th, our second Tuesday of the month at 12 o'clock Pacific time. Sasha is our fearless host of those, and they're really fun and engaging. I always look forward to those times to connect with y'all. And then lastly, if you are willing and able and have the time to volunteer, just let us know. I don't know how easy it is to get to this barcode from the screen, but go to womencoders.tech and just send us a message. And if you want to lead a talk, a virtual talk like Andrea's doing here for us today, or a walk, a coffee and stroll like we've done in the San Diego area. So just let us know. I think that is the end of my slides. So I will stop sharing to let Andrea start her amazing presentation.
All right. We tested this ahead of time, make sure everything's set up. All right. I can see the chat. I can see everything. Awesome. All right. Hi, everybody. Very nice to be here. I'm Andrea Goulet, and I'm going to be talking about the idea of whether or not we are technical or are we non-technical, and kind of how I came to the realization of I'm actually both, and I think you are too. Feel free to use the chat. I'm monitoring that, and I know Sasha and Kelly are as well. I'm just really grateful to be here because, like Kelly had mentioned, especially early, I got into tech around 2009. I'll get into this a little bit, but it was really hard for me at first because I felt like I didn't belong. And so being in groups like this that help me feel a sense of affinity has really helped me. So it's great that y'all are here. And I will dive in. So I want you to meet my friend Scott. So this is me in high school, and this is my friend Scott. So Scott and I went to high school together. We were in all of the same classes. And if in case he is kind of the stereotypical programmer of the late 90s in this picture, right? And he went off after we graduated. We, got along, we had lunches together, all of that good stuff. He went off and got his degree in computer science. I went off and got my degree in business and marketing. And so, we kind of both went our separate ways. He was focusing on, he worked at a joint venture between Microsoft and Accenture and was working on large enterprise projects. And so I had done consulting. I had worked with, small businesses on how to develop messaging and, had done some enterprise stuff too. So when I went to my high school reunion, I was really surprised because Scott came up to me and said, "Hey, I've been reading your blog about how you help small businesses with their communication, and I want you to come and be the CEO of my startup." And I was like, "What the heck are you talking about?" Like, I don't know how to code. I don't know if you saw, but I'm a marketer and you totally have the wrong idea. Thanks. It's great to catch up. Um, But he told me that, he had gone through my blog of like how I was approaching things. And he said something that made me really think. He said, "You might not think that you are a programmer, but you absolutely think like a programmer." And I was like, "What is a programmer?" Like, and so he literally had to describe that the systems that I was building, because I was using like complex, content management systems, and I had all these, now I know to call them Boolean searches, and I had all these filters, and I had, different formulas that I was building. He's like, that's programming. Like you've got inputs and you're creating these algorithms and you're getting outputs. At the end of the day, that's what you're doing. So, after some due diligence, we, decided to go in business together. So that's us a few years later. We created a company called Corgi Bites, and the tagline was "Old Code, New Tricks." And that is our logo of Ein, who's Scott's little corgi, with her little wrench bone. And so we focused on modernizing legacy systems. And so, kind of celebrating the joy of software maintenance. Scott kept saying, "I love fixing bugs, but no one will let me." And I always found that funny because I was like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Software maintenance is kind of this, thing that is kind of devalued." Um, and I keep getting told, "You're too good of a programmer to fix bugs." He's like, "But this is the thing I want to do. So if I start a consulting company, then I'll get to fix bugs all day and I'll get to do the thing I like." Um, so yeah, so we built this company. We started talking about it. We did really well. And then a few years later, like I was learning how to code. We got different projects and stuff, and there was a lot of tension, but there was also a lot of great stuff. And so a few years after Scott and I started the business together, we got married, um, and then we have two kids now. So it's been kind of a wild ride. Um, but this, I think, is something that has really forced us to become really good at communication. And Scott has challenged me in so many ways, and I've challenged him back. But having that relationship that's really rooted in compassion, but also very different points of view. Like, I don't know if any of y'all have ever experienced the like traditional, sales engineering schism that tends to happen, but we very much had that. Um, and it really came to light when Scott got on his first podcast. So we were, it was maybe we had run the business for like 4 years and we're like, "Oh my gosh, we can start presenting." And so he had gotten on this podcast. We were so excited. So we were on the drive to grandma's house. It was like a 3 hour drive. It was like, let's listen to the podcast on the way. Um, and so, we're listening, everything sounds great. It's like, "Oh my God, Scott, you're great. Like, we're going to get clients from you talking about how much you love fixing bugs." And then he gets to the end, and the podcast host asks about his origin story and like the company's origin story. And he said, "I am the technical founder. And then Andrea, we went to high school together. She's my non technical founder." And when I heard that word, I lost it. I'm so mad because I'm like, I have sat next to, I mean, like, he's my husband at this point. Like, I can be, a little bit more myself around him. But I was like, what do I have to do to be technical in your eyes? How dare you call me non-technical? Like I have taken classes, like I know JavaScript now, like I can basically do some stuff in Ruby. Like I've been to the conferences. Like, do you need me to go get a degree? Do you need me to like what do I need to do in your eyes? And in case you can't tell, Scott is, really he's pretty quiet but also profound. And so he sat there and said, after a while, after I had gotten everything out of my system, he said, "I do really care about how I represent you in public." And so I remember that we had a sales call right before I recorded that podcast. And I spent a lot of time listening to how you describe yourself. And I tried to use the exact same words that you used. And so when you call yourself technical, that's when I will. And this is like I'm getting teary-eyed because it was like it did not occur to me that I had anything to do with this. right? Like it was a big wake up call. And I can tell you this turned into a full blown identity crisis that I have been working on for over a decade. And so over the years, I've kind of come to find some patterns that we'll kind of chat about a little bit, to kind of help us just like really challenge this view. Like, why do we put ourselves into these camps? Why do we say somebody's technical and somebody's non-technical? And what does that actually mean in the context of, doing our work, especially coding and, building software? So there's kind of three patterns that I've noticed that we're going to go over today. The first is gender stereotypes. We also have identity groups, and then we have what does technical mean? Like what actually are technical skills? So let's first get into gender stereotypes. I grew up in the 80s, and when I saw movies, like I had this Barbie, it was called Teen Talk Barbie. I don't know if anybody has heard of it. Um, but you pressed a button on her back, and the first thing that she said was, "Math class is tough. Party dresses are fun. I'll always be able to help you. Do you have a crush on anyone?" So it's like, okay, math is hard. I'm a girl. Like I guess I have to go to marketing, like in sales, and I have to be around everybody because, right? I also, when I watched some of these movies as an adult, especially war games, it was really interesting to me because this was a movie that Scott, like, he's like, I watched this and I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to be a programmer. And in case you haven't seen it, it's got very young Matthew Broderick in it. And he is a hacker and kind of hacks into the school system and is like changing grades. And he thinks that he starts to play a game, but he ends up like, and like getting control of the nuclear warheads, right? And so then it becomes this like whole thing where it's like this high school kid. But there was something that I noticed. There was one scene in there where the, you know, uh, girl who is a friend who's like tagging along, um, they go into the computer lab because there's no laptops at this point, and they say to her, "You have to stay outside. You can't come in here." And she's like, "Why?" And it's like, "You'll distract the people who are here." And that's one of those things I was like, when I saw it as a kid, I didn't think anything of it. But then I saw it later, I was like, oh my gosh, like, I think that's a big part of why I felt like I didn't belong. And, things have gotten better for sure, right? Especially with, the work that y'all are doing and stuff. But this is embedded in kind of our culture. And so when we look at these stereotypes, it does have an impact on how we view ourselves. So for me, it was like I'm, like the kind of way that we look at things is essentially like, boys code and girls are essentially objects, like weird science, like literally, a sexual object, or at best passive observers of, the boy who's doing all the fun tech stuff. But, the reframed belief that I have is now the stereotypes that I saw and that we see out there, they don't reflect the science. And so if we look at the science, we can start to see a little bit about how nuanced these are. And so, movies of the 80s is kind of an extreme example, but we can start to see where this shows up in very subtle ways. So what the science is, right there, the stereotypes about female inferiority in math, like they're not true, right? Like girls are just as good as boys as math. Um, and so the stereotype, when people are asked this question, who is naturally more skilled at math? This was in 2018. Um, you know, 2/3 of the people said boys, right? And that's kind of a reflection of, cultural belief. But it was interesting because then they asked questions differently. Girls do as well as boys at math. And then 71% of people said, oh, boys are better at math. But when we shifted it just slightly, so instead of girls being at the end, right, they were like boys do as well as girls, it flipped. And people responded that girls were better at math. And so look at the huge distinction from just like the tiny ways that we're phrasing sentences. Like these have huge impacts on how we build ourselves. And this is like very subconscious. Like I think I probably just a few minutes ago said girls do as well at boys in math. Like if you go back and like my intro here, I probably did, right? And it's the things that we just don't even think about. But, for me, what was impactful here was recognizing that these stereotypes exist, but they're not true, right? And the stereotype, like what it is judging an individual based on a group, understanding. And I'm like, that's not me, right? Yes, okay, people believe this, but that's not what the science says, and that's not me. And that took a really long time, but learning to trust the science, I think, is one of the things that has really, really helped me because it feels more of like uncovering what the truth is a little bit more. So when we phrase things a little bit differently, girls and boys do equally well at math. Boys and girls do equally well at math. Then when we switch instead of having a comparative statement where it's like, just as well, it's like they're both well, right? This actually, oh, hi, Michael. Um, this actually reflects what the science says. It's pretty much 50-50, right? So another interesting kind of research that they did was environmental cues. So this is called ambient belonging. So this is a really interesting study from 2009 where they looked at computer science programs in colleges. And so they had two different classes that just the environment was set up. So one of them had Star Trek posters and comic books and like soda everywhere and gaming, kind of like, what you think of when you think of like, especially in like the 90s, early aughts, like of what a traditional computer science room would look like. And so, kind of they would give a tour, and then at the end, they would say, are you interested in a degree in computer science? And they would literally just walk by the room and say, so they didn't even talk to a professor. They just walked in the room, spent a minute in there, and then walked out. And women were less interested. They said, no. And like, I remember this being me. So then what they did was they did it again, but they just changed out the way the room was set up. So they had things that were neutral. So they had water, they had books, they had like paper clips, pictures of plants. And then there was no gender difference in the interest. And so I just found like these are the things that it's like once you start to notice it, you start to notice it a lot, but then you notice the science behind it. And to me, that has been a huge part of like I trust the science more than I trust kind of the 1,000 years of culture that has led to this point, that basically isn't true, even though that's kind of the way we think of things and that we can challenge it. So I chose to trust the science. So the next thing we can chat about is identity groups. And the very first computer science, like, networking group that I went to, we went to a Ruby conference in 2010, right? I was so excited. I was like, okay, like I'm the CEO of a software company. I'm learning how to code. It was Ruby Nation, I think. There were 400 people at the conference, and I was one of three women. And I looked at Scott because I came from the business and marketing world, and I looked at him. I was like, you did not tell me about this. What is this? And like, the majority of the room was white too. And I was just like, what is going on here? But it's like, okay, line to the bathroom's really short. That's good. But I noticed that like I kept getting asked this question of, are you technical or non-technical? So I would reach out and I would say, hi, my name's Andrea. And it's like, hi, I'm, Joe. And next question from them will be, are you technical or non-technical? And I was like, I didn't know how to answer because it kind of brought me back to the whole thing with Scott, where it was like, I don't know, am I technical enough? Like, what does technical even mean? Like, and just it became really hard to answer. And eventually, it really kind of grated on me And so finally one day I asked Scott, I was like, do people ask you this question when they meet you? Like when you go to a software conference, do people say, are you technical or non-technical? He's like, I've never been asked that ever in my life, right? Because people just assume. But what was interesting, he's like, I've actually said that to people. And I was like, really? You're not evil. Why? Like, and when he said that, he was like, well, I want to know that our chat's going to be psychologically safe because I have so many conversations with people who look like you at parties, and I say what I do for a living, and people have literally walked away from me. And he's like, it hurts. It hurts my feelings. And he's like, and it sucks. And he's like, I think that's what's happening here is, you know, wanting to make sure that I'm going to be okay because I don't like the feeling of me going and, you know, saying I want to geek out about software. But what I heard was, are you sure you belong here? You're different than everybody else. Like, why are you here? And so, like, again, when we dug in, we realized that both of us were in pain. And that, kind of these ideas and these concepts and these, phrases that we were using, it was as a way to guard ourselves. And so then it was less of a, kind of my idea was like, okay, technical people threaten my sense of belonging, right? They're telling me that I don't belong. But when I reframe things, and this is what kind of got me on, because I was so mad at the end of that conference that I got up on stage and gave a lightning talk. And I think it was called um, something to the effect of your code is awesome, your English sucks, or something like that. I was like, I'm a communicator. Like, here you go. Like, great, you can write in code. Here's how we start to talk to people. And I gave an example up there and was like, you are giving a binary question, which reinforces stereotypes. The better question to ask is an open ended one that assumes that because I'm in a software conference, I belong here. So try saying this instead. What brings you here? Because what that does, just from a research survey perspective, is it opens the door for people to describe themselves, and then you can use that as a jumping off point. All right. So you're not like validating an assumption. And so again, these tiny little things. And so then I kind of like, you know, am grateful that people didn't kick me out of the room. They actually were interested. So now it's like I've been, kind of forming this niche of what is the intersection between code and communication and how different and how much of an overlap are they? So my reframed belief is like these rivalries are actually what's preventing us from collaborating and solving these complex problems together. Because when we actually sit down and we trust each other and we have these different perspectives, we can then dig in and like, why are we doing this? Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. And then we can solve problems together. Right? There's some great work by an economist called Scott Page, and he wrote a book called The Diversity Bonus. And essentially, like, this is mathematically how it works, right? Where you take different people with different perspectives, right? And as long as they can communicate well and have empathy, this is where you get a 1 + 1 = 3 because you can't get innovation if everybody thinks the same. You get innovation from these back and forth battles and like, okay, I recognize you, like, what's going on here? And then you identify what the core problem is, and then you can start to solve it. So another thing with the research that I found was really interesting is that there's this concept called intergroup empathy bias. And this is, I think, something that's really leading to a lot of polarization in a lot of different places right now. But this is some great work by Emile Bruno. And essentially, what this is that if you have a really strong affinity with one group, it can backfire because we tend to mute our empathy for members of rival groups. We see this a lot in sports teams, right? And it's like, you've got these rivalries, and I will never. I saw one. It's like I will never let my daughter marry somebody who goes. And it's like, whoa, that's kind of a big thing. Now, A lot of people, it's like, oh, okay, we're going to do that for these like 3 hours when the game is happening. And it's kind of fun. That's a fun rivalry. And then we come back and we all have a beer, right? That's fine, right? Right. That's a way to form affinity, right? And we know, but, you know, if we continue in there and, that's when kind of all the polarization happens. And this can lead to people not talking to each other, right? This is that technical, non technical. Like, oh, I'm in the business, I'm in sales, the business. The business doesn't understand me, right? And it's like, oh, okay, I'm the business, right? And like, I want to understand you, but how do we do this? So, the way that we get out of this is we abstract up to another level. So, we say, okay, man and woman, we're humans, right? Republican, Democrat, whatever political affiliation you have, we're citizens. We all are part of this nation, right? Technical, non-tech, we are all at this conference, right? And so then we get rid of the either or, and it becomes more of an and. And we recognize that, the different perspectives can be incredibly hard to recognize and tolerate, and like huge emotions come and boundaries need to be set, like all of that stuff. But when you come at it from a just place of, okay, we're all part of this bigger group, that's when like innovation actually happens. Because otherwise, you entrench yourself into an us them thinking and you don't get that perspective congruence or convergence. So, empathy is really essential for solving complex problems. And so one way we can think of this is that it can feel really good to have these affinity groups, right? Like if I'm not a particular sportsman, but like this is an affinity group, right? It feels really good and really restorative to be around people who care about the same things that we do and who all think the way we do. And this is a really restorative thing and it's really important. But if we stay here and we never interact with anybody who thinks differently, that's where the problem is. Or if we start to think that, oh, anybody who isn't part of this group is the problem, or, that's where the problem is. So use your affinity groups like this to grow your capacity to have empathy for other people, but don't stay there long enough where it continues to feed your confirmation bias. The other thing here is reimagining group boundaries. Um, so you can discover ways to kind of make your individual differences an asset. So at the 2015 Agile conference, this was another thing. Scott had gotten his very first talk at like a big conference. We had our 10-week-old with us, and I was like, I don't know, do I go to the conference? Scott was like, I promise, Agilists are your people. Like, you're gonna love these people. I was like, I don't know, I have a baby. And so, like, went to the conference, saw him, and I noticed this was back when it was a week long, and they had a software craftsmanship like track. And there were about 15 people that were in every single like session together. All had lunch together. Scott was like, these are my people. And he had struggled for so long to find that sense of belonging around, like, I love fixing bugs. And everybody looked at him like he was crazy. And they're like, nobody likes doing that. Everybody likes doing features like this stuff. He's like, no, I want to fix bugs all day. That's my favorite thing. He all of a sudden was around people for one of the first times where he felt like he belonged in terms of the technical capacity. And I hadn't even thought of this, that like there's subgroups within there. So like he's technical, but there's the features versus the, I like maintaining. And so there's this group of software maintainers who are like, I love this stuff, but nobody wants to listen to us. And so just it was amazing to watch these kinds of relationships form. And at the end, I said, how are you going to keep this going? Like, clearly, there's some great stuff here. And one of the developers looked at me and said, we're not. I was like, why? He's like, we know how to code. We know nothing about community. I was like, I can do that. like here. And so like went to the lunch table. I was like, okay, here's a Slack thing that we got set up. We're going to meet every Wednesday. Here's a sign up sheet, like boop, 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 boop. And somebody went around and like literally was like, sign up for this thing, went to every table. And then that was what launched this group called Legacy Kid Rocks that still exists today. We've now have a conference that we've run for the past several years called MenderCon, and it's about celebrating the joy of software maintenance, right? And like using those differences where it's like, okay, there's these feature builders, but then also saying, well, we're menders, right? So creating that affinity group where it's like, it's not an either or. We need makers, right? We need the people who are like the rapid prototypers and get stuff out. I consider myself a maker, but we also need the very deliberate people who are going to do all of the tests and all of the edge cases and double check all of the cross the T's and dot the I's. And Scott even says, don't forget about the lowercase j's. Everybody forgets the dots on the lowercase j's. Um, and it's become this amazing thing. And that was like another was that like I had met Michael Feathers at that conference. Scott was like, I can't reach out to Michael Feathers. I was like, I don't know who he is. I'm just going to ask him on the podcast. He was like one of our first guests. And so again, it's like I used my sales and marketing experience where it's like helping us build this thing and build this community that has really helped me feel like I belong because I noticed that the people who love this stuff are some of the most compassionate and empathic people that I have ever met. The world of software maintenance is just amazing. So the last thing is how do we think about technical skills, right? Like when we say the word technical, what do we actually mean, right? How do we define it? So my initial belief was, oh, technical people are the people who have developed technology, right? But what I've learned by following the research is no, technical people are people who have developed a skill. And the reason is that if we go back to the etymology of the word technical, it comes from the Greek word techne, which means art, skill, or craft. So if we look at what technical means, it means that you have a honed ability, you have situational awareness, you have a deep and nuanced knowledge, and you have so much information that you're able to kind of develop your own methods for how you do things, and you're able to execute really consistently. And so if we look at those kind of characteristics of what these are, anything can be a technical skill. It is not a question of whether or not you build technology, it's just a question of domain expertise, right? So, my best friend, I'm on the East Coast. I just had dinner with her. She's an ecologist. We go out like and go on walks, and she's telling me the Latin names of all these plants, and she like can nerd out about the soil biomes and stuff. I have no idea what she's talking about, but I love just watching her nerd out. She is very technical about plants, right? Like she's a college professor. She has her PhD, right? She's technical when it comes to plants, right? She's competent when it comes to software, right? But she doesn't call herself technical, right? I watched Simone Biles or like the ice skaters, like Ilian Milan. I don't, if did anybody see him and then Alyssa Liu, like just, you're watching them like jump in the air and move their bodies in ways that almost defy physics. No one's going to call them not technical, right? That is a technical skill, right? It's something that they have put in the time, they have put in the craft, right? And so when we start to reframe that, like parenting skills, I've got, friends who it's like they have read all of the parenting blogs, they know like all of the stuff, and it's like they really dedicate themselves. So anything can be a technical skill. It's just a matter of which domain are you technical in. And then when we recognize that, then we can all come together and we can appreciate that technologists do not have a monopoly on technical skills. And there's this great quote that I love by Arthur C. Clarke. And the idea is that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. We see this a lot now with AI. It's like, oh my gosh, these feel like humans, like this feels like magic. But I think we can also look at this as any sufficiently advanced technique is indistinguishable from magic. Like I watched the Olympics and I was like, that is like how, right? I look at, Scott able to like find the tiniest semicolon in this like block of text in just an instant. I'm like, how? But then they look at me and go, you created this, like you kickstart this community in 2 hours. How? Right? And just, I think one of the nice things is that when we appreciate that like wizardry in other people and we're not threatened by it, and we say they're just as deep as I am over here, then we can leverage our skills together. It's also interesting, because the idea of technical and non-technical, it's also kind of wrapped up in the idea of soft skills. And this is really interesting too. So I don't know if anybody remembers Mean Girls, but it's like, stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen. Like this soft skills never was supposed to happen. Um, in 1972, so there was an organizational psychologist in the 1950s. And after the war, he was like, we are able to train some things really, really well, like how to, operate this piece of machinery. We can write a technical manual for it. How do we, and so the idea of like, well, how do we do that same thing for, people and paper was the problem. And it's like, how do we actually like create training as well as we have? So he had done all of these things. He coined the term soft skills. And then in 1972, all of the military branches, I think except for the Department of War, um, came together and they had a conference on software skills. Like it's like, and that was the end thing. They had all these presentations, and at the end, they had all of these working groups. And it's like, should soft skills be something that we use to develop training? Unanimously, they all said no. Because they said the term soft skill and hard skill, they should be de-emphasized or discontinued. That was the finding. Like that was what everybody said. Like that's from the report. And the reason that they gave is that it's virtually impossible to define, right? We've just gone through that. Like, what is technical? Who knows, right? It's not mutually exclusive, right? That's another thing that we've just gone through. The categorization is irrelevant because you're going to have to use paper and you're going to have to interact with people in any aspect of any job. So segmenting it out, like there's no one who just does paper and people like you always are interacting with other things. And then it also creates misunderstandings. So back in 1972, everybody saw this coming, right? um but what ended up happening is that the term became more popular, people used it, and just it kind of caught on. Eventually soft skills in government documents got replaced with or hard skills got replaced with technical skills. I have a LinkedIn newsletter. I did like a 5,000 word essay on like the history of soft skills and why it's a farce. When I'm done, I'll pull the link up. But it's real. I think that's the other thing too, is that going back into the history of these things and really getting curious and going, why? And then realizing like, oh, this was never supposed to be a thing. Okay, let me just kind of go, it's not a big thing, right? And that helps me recognize that the words are things that I assign meaning to, but it's not necessarily that the meaning is something that should, have power over me. I'm the one who's creating that. So, kind of having this either or mindset. This is why I call it technical, non-technical, both, because it's like, are you this or are you that? We see that with the intergroup empathy bias. We see that with the binary questions at conferences, right? We see all of these different things where it just doesn't help. And so we tend to put ourselves into two camps of like good with machines or good with people. But what that ends up doing is it just breeds contempt. It reinforces stereotypes. It creates organizational silos and resentment. And it doesn't like it actually suppresses innovation. None of the stuff that we want. So, following the research, we know how to do this, right? We say we're good with machines and good with people, right? And this is what leads to innovation, creativity, compassion, inclusion, collaboration. And to me, I actually feel like, with the rise of, I call it like English first programming, or pick your natural language, but I've been able to do some really cool stuff with Claude Code that it would have taken me forever to like figure out the syntax and, but I'm like, oh, like, and I remember just recently because I started this um, new coaching program and I'm like, I want to have this thing happen. I want to take the transcripts and then have it like automatically create these session notes, but I want it in this way and I want it to generate a PDF and I want it to be this brand and like when I got it to work and I was able to just push a button and like this thing magically appeared, all of a sudden I experienced the feeling that everybody told me that they had when they got into software, which was, this idea of there was nothing there and then I created a thing. And that feeling of power and that feeling of like I did that, I had never had that until just recently. And when that happened, I broke down in tears. Like it was almost the cathartic release because I truly had gotten to the point where I'm like, I am technical, right? I went and now I've joined, you know, it was called the Tech Evangelist Committee for my local AI, you know, um, group, nonprofit in the area. And I was like, no, we need to call this tech enablement. And I'm there, like, basically translating. I was like, we need to get funding for this, and all of these implementation documents are not going to get it, right? I'm really good at taking really complex technical things and knowing what the business side is and saying, oh, here's a two slides that are going to get you what you want and are going to get you funding, right? And I'm proud to be on that team, right? And people there think I'm technical. I think I'm technical, and they think I'm technical because I think I'm technical. And it started like this this took a while because the first thing that I did was I got this tattoo. And this happened because I we had walked into a client meeting like or a sales meeting and you know someone asked me like Scott was sitting there and this prospect asked me he's like, are you sure you know what you're talking about? Because I had been talking about like psychomag complexity and like all these different things. I was like, yeah. He goes, because you don't look like you know what you're talking about. He looks like he knows what he should talk about. And like said it so explicitly that I got really angry and like literally went to the tattoo shop. And so, this calls back as undefined. And so to me, I'm like, no one defines me, right? But it took a while. Like I put this out into the world also, so then that way when I shake people's hands and I'm like, "Hi, I'm Andrea," they don't ask me because they're like, "Oh, she has a code snippet on, inked on her wrist. She's probably knows how to code. She's probably technical." But this external signal has been on my wrist for over a decade. It's only recently since I've started to believe it, right? This is a process. It takes a long time. And when we are in groups like this and when we start actually talking about how important this is, instead of just internalizing the shame, like that's where the real progress is. So that's what I got. And so I just recently started a program called Debugging Human Communication. And so now I'm coaching. So we sold Corgi Bites a couple of years ago. I've been trying to figure out what's next, and now I'm just really enjoying working with individuals on improving their communication skills, and using all of that technical expertise I have around like, oh, here's this sentence structure, and here's how we do things differently. And if you want to, actually make the impact that you want at work, or if you want to land that job, those kinds of things. Thank you. Um, you know, so this is a new program that I've launched and I love it. It is so much fun. And this is where I feel like I've ended up, where now it really feels like that integration and that the idea between technical and non-technical, it kind of has fallen away. So that's what I have. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm so glad that y'all are here. Um,
Much.
so